The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs is one of the most well-known urban legends. You have a babysitter that's receiving some scary phone calls asking if she's checked the children. Because the calls won't stop and she's afraid, she notifies the police. They trace the call and they let her know that the calls are coming from inside the house. The movie When a Stranger Calls is an exact copy of this legend. When a Stranger Calls is a movie about a babysitter named Jill Johnson, played by Carol Kane, and the psychopath that's sending her harassing phone calls asking,
"Have you checked the children?"
At first, she assumes that they're just prank calls, but once they become increasingly threatening and more frequent, she calls the police and she tells them what's going on. The ringing also gets louder and louder, increasing the tension in the movie. Once the police can trace the call, they find out that the call is coming from inside the house.
Leave me alone! Jill, this is Sergeant Sacker. Listen to me. We've traced the call. It's coming from inside the house. Got a squad car's on the way over there right now. Just get out of that house.
The cops arrive, they arrest him, and he's put into a psychiatric hospital. But unfortunately, she never checked on the children, and they were dismembered before police arrived. The first 20 minutes of When a Stranger Calls are considered by some to be the scariest 20 minutes in movie history. And the first 12 minutes of Scream is an homage to the opening of When a Stranger Calls. It was 7:30 p.m. on Saturday, March 18th, 1950. And Janett Christman arrived at the Romax to babysit their 3-year-old son, Gregory. She loved kids and her parents would only let her babysit for people that they knew. She chose to skip an 8th grade school party to babysit because she had purchased an outfit for Easter, and this would help her make her last payment. She would also babysit for another family, the Mullers, and you'll hear that name again. Before leaving, Ed Romax showed Janett how to load, unload, and fire his shotgun if she needed to. The night of March 18th was described as very haunting. It was raining, sleeting, and very, very windy. And a friend of Janett's, who was also babysitting, talked about how the entire night felt eerie and how she felt uneasy. And throughout the evening, the weather got even worse. The temperature dropped to the mid-20s, followed by heavy rain, sleet, and hail. Around 11 that night, Janett tried to call police, but she was so hysterical they couldn't understand her. They were, however, able to make out the words, "Come quick." But before the officer could get any information from her, things went silent. It wasn't the sound of a receiver being hung up, there was just silence. And because it was so late, the test board at the telephone company wasn't staffed, and the call couldn't be traced. Soon after Janett called police, Ann Romack tried calling to check in and see how things were going at home, but she received a busy signal, but she didn't really think much of it. When they arrived home around 1:30 that morning, they noticed the front window blinds were open and the porch light was on. The front and back doors were also unlocked and the side window had been broken. When they walked towards the living room, they found Janett on the floor. But fortunately, little Gregory was asleep safe and sound in a different room. Investigators found evidence of a serious struggle that stretched from the phone in the kitchen through the hallway to the living room at the front of the house. Janett's friend, Anne, remembers the day after vividly. She said it was a Sunday morning and her family was getting ready to go to church when the phone rang. Her mother answered the phone and suddenly her face went pale and the family just sat stunned and unable to move. 30 minutes later, a police officer came to interview Anne and they questioned dozens of men, but the most likely suspect was Robert Muller, a friend of the Romax. According to testimony later introduced to a grand jury, Janett's mom said that she felt frightened and uncomfortable around Robert and said that he had run his hand across her dress 2 days before when they were alone. Ed Romack also testified that Muller had once told him he admired Janett's well-developed form. He also knew that she would be babysitting for the Romax that night because he had asked her to babysit at his home. Ed Romack also told police that Muller at one point told him matter-of-factly, "I might have done it and then forgotten about it." Robert also carried a mechanical metal pencil that had a round punch end that matched the puncture wounds on Janett's head. He had also excused himself from a party and was gone for about 2 hours. Unfortunately, the evidence against Muller was circumstantial, and even though he was convicted of Janett's murder, he sued for unlawful imprisonment and claimed that his constitutional rights had been violated. Robert's conviction was overturned, and he moved out of town, and after he left, there were no similar crimes reported. As with any legend, there are variations. It just depends on where you're getting the information. The legend of Moll Dyer dates back to the late 1700s in Leonardtown, Maryland, and it greatly resembles the mythology about the Blair Witch. A road, a stream, and a large rock also bear her name, and according to the legend, she was accused of being a witch. As stated on the St. Mary's County Historical Society website, Moll Dyer was a real person. She was born in 1635 in Devon, England, and in 1669 she sailed with a brother to St. Kitts in the West Indies and served 8 years as an indentured servant. Around 1677 she relocated to Maryland, and she may have learned African rituals from the enslaved people of St. Kitts. Moll Dyer was a single woman who took care of people, and she used herbal medicine and spells that she learned along the way. She probably was considered odd, but she was left alone for 30 years, but for some reason things just turned ugly. She lived in isolation and would walk around in the summer just gathering plants from the woods and begging her neighbors for food or whatever she may have needed. Her neighbors were so afraid of her that they didn't dare tell her no. It's believed that Moll Dyer practiced as a healer, and during the 17th century, healers were believed to dabble in witchcraft, and their town's misfortunes were often blamed on them. During the long winter of 1697-98, she was blamed for an outbreak of influenza that claimed many lives in St. Mary's County, so townspeople decided to run her out. They came to her door with torches and pitchforks, surrounded her shack, and set it on fire. She then took off into the woods, and several days later, a young boy that was searching for his lost cattle discovered her frozen body kneeling on a rock with one arm stretched to the sky as if cursing her enemies. Her hand and knee prints were supposedly burned or imprinted into the 875-pound rock that was found in the woods, and townspeople believed that it was an everlasting curse that she placed on the area. It was also said that the men responsible for leading the mob to her home all had times of what they considered horrible luck. Their land became barren, their livestock died, they got sick, and their families suffered. The rock was later found with the help of a man who lived nearby, so in 1972 it was dragged out by the National Guard and it was set up outside the historic jail. The handprint-shaped depression was still visible at the time. The boulder is now located at the Historical Society's headquarters at Tudor Hall, and although the handprint is no longer clearly visible, people have reported feeling ill around it. Those torch-carrying townspeople still have descendants in the area, and some of them feel a sense of guilt. And on the coldest nights of the year, people have reported seeing a woman with long white hair in a white dress walking around with a white dog. In October of 1994, 3 student filmmakers disappeared in the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland while shooting a documentary, and a year later their footage was found. At the beginning of the movie, the filmmakers stopped in the town of Burkittsville, Maryland, which they say was formerly called Blair, and this is where they shoot their first scene in the cemetery. And Heather also explains how there's an unusually high number of children laid to rest there. There was a woman named Ellie Kedward, and several children accused her of luring them into her home to draw blood from them. And she was found guilty of witchcraft, and she was banished from the village during a very harsh winter, and she presumably died. Eventually, all of her accusers, along with half of the town's children, vanished. And because the town feared a curse, they fled Blair and vowed to never say her name again. And Coffin Rock is where a ritualistic mass murder took place in 1886. A search party was looking for a child named Robin Weaver, and later the search party were found nude, tied together, and disemboweled with pagan symbols carved into their foreheads. The filmmakers also learn about a hermit in Burkittsville named Rustin Parr, who came down from the Black Hills Forest yelling he was finished because he had just killed 7 children and he blamed their deaths on the Blair Witch. He later denied it, and the supposed footage from the Lost documentary crew was found at Rustin Parr's house. The Blair Witch Project was a game changer that established the found footage genre and redefined horror. It was filmed in 8 days and it wrapped up on Halloween 1997. Once it was released in theaters nationwide on July 16, 1999, horror would never be the same. The movie studio also kept the 3 actors away from the press, and they didn't correct websites like IMDb that said that the actors were dead. Heather's mother even received sympathy cards. The real Burkittsville only appears twice in the movie. You see a welcome to Burkittsville sign, and then you see shots in the cemetery where the witch's first victims were supposedly buried. The scenes in the Black Hills Forest were actually filmed in Seneca Creek State Park, which is about 25 miles west of Burkittsville. Almost immediately after the movie was released in theaters, one of the welcome to the historic village of Burkittsville signs was stolen. The town ended up having to replace the wooden signs with welded metal signs with metal posts. Those signs rusted, but they were replaced. The mayor at the time, Mayor Brown, woke up to find a fan of the movie in her living room. He apparently assumed that there was some type of tour going on. I don't know why. And fans were also holding seances in the graveyard looking for a witch that did not exist. The town's newspaper staff constantly received calls and messages online asking for updates on the students' disappearances. In 1999, there were only 75 houses, a post office, and a church within the town's limits. So before the 3rd movie in the series was released in 2016, the town took down its welcome signs and blocked off alleys to deter tourists. Burkittsville is not a scary place. It has a spook hill, which is an incline just outside of town where the ghosts of Civil War soldiers supposedly push cars that are idling uphill late at night. And they have a cryptid, the Snallygaster. The legend of La Llorona is popular throughout the southwestern U.S. and Mexico, and it dates back over 500 years. The story varies a little, depending on who tells it or the country, but basically, Maria was a beautiful woman who married a handsome, wealthy Spaniard, and soon they had 2 children. After a few happy years, her husband starts spending less and less time at home. So one day, while walking near the river with her children, she sees her husband with another woman. So in a fit of rage, she throws her children into the river. But once they disappear under the water, she snaps back to reality and she realizes what she did. So filled with grief and regret, she runs along the bank of the river desperately trying to get them back, but she fails. She then drowns herself or dies of grief, depending on who's telling the story, and she's buried the next morning. That night, a woman in a long white robe, just like the one Maria was buried in, was seen walking up and down the riverbank, now known as La Llorona, which translates to the weeping woman. In some versions, her children are illegitimate, so she drowns them in order to be with the man that she loves, and she kills herself when he rejects her. When she reaches the gates of heaven, she wasn't allowed in because her children weren't with her. Her evil misdeeds caused her spirit to be trapped on earth forever. In later versions, she kidnaps children who resemble her own or who disobey their parents. She's a Mexican boogeyman, and children are told that if they misbehave, La Llorona will take them, or that going out after dark will make her appear. So many adults who grew up with the story said they believe in La Llorona. In the United States, she's been seen throughout the Southwest, and as far as Montana on the banks of the Yellowstone River. She's still seen at night near rivers, oceans, and other bodies of water, hovering above the ground in a white nightgown, wailing constantly about her children. And when you hear her cries, run away. The Curse of La Llorona takes place between the first 2 Conjuring movies, and it's set in Los Angeles in 1973. In the movie, we see Father Perez when he's talking to Anna Garcia about his evil doll case, and Annabelle is flashed on screen to show the connection. At the beginning of the movie, it's 1673, and we see a family playing in a field in Mexico. A boy goes for a walk, and on his way back, he sees his mother drowning his brother in a stream. He tries to run away, but she catches him and drowns him too. Fast forward 300 years later, Caseworker Anna T. Garcia learns that 2 of her clients' children haven't been going to school. So when she goes to visit them for a welfare check, she finds the mother frantic and the children are locked behind a door. So when she opens the door against the mother's wishes, she's attacked and the mother is arrested. So the boys tell Anna that they're safe in that room, so they're not supposed to leave it. But she ignores them and takes them to a shelter. So there, one of the 2 boys is sleepwalking and his brother follows him. They then both see a woman in a white dress, and the boys are later found dead in a river, and Anna is called to the scene. The mother is blamed for their murders, screaming that it was Anna's fault for taking her kids and that she had tried to stop La Llorona.